Hey guys, I'm here to talk to you about scene one of Act 5. I hope you guys were able to find all of the materials that you needed and were able to work through this scene. I'm really excited because in a few minutes I get to go deliver some yard signs to some of you, so I might actually get to see you today because if I'm going to your house, I am honking and hopefully I'll get to see you. Anyways, Hamlet, Act 5, Scene 1. How this next couple weeks are going to work. This week we're doing scene one, obviously. Next week we're doing scene two, which is the final scene of the play. And then next week I'm going to schedule a call to go over with you guys the essay. So it's really important that if you are home at that time that you hop on to listen. Okay. All right. So scene one opens up in a church graveyard, and we have a grave digger and another grave digger. So where it says other, that's just the second grave digger. And Shakespeare uses what's just considered everyday prose here, and that's just basically a standard back and forth conversation. So just remember that for some upcoming questions. So they're just having a standard conversation with the use of prose. What they're debating, though, is very important. And the first line is she to be buried in a Christian burial when she willfully seeks her own salvation? So we should know right away, even though they didn't say the name, that they're talking about Ophelia here. And they just have this debate on, is she deserving of this Christian burial? Because in this time period, suicides would not receive a proper church burial. And so they say, well, if she went to the water, then she drowned herself. If the water came to her, then she was drowned. And while they're digging graves, it's kind of weird because they're kind of just passing out skulls and bones. And off in the distance, Hamlet and Horatio approach. So this is called concealment because we know they're there, but the gravedigger still. And Hamlet is like, how is this guy happy and singing when he's digging graves? And he eventually approaches and they have a conversation about this and how, at first, though, Hamlet and Horatio are talking about this digging up of the skulls. What if that was a lawyer? What if that was a judge? What if that was this? How can he just throw his skull around? Finally, Hamlet steps forward and says, whose grave is this? And there's some irony because Hamlet has no idea that Ophelia has died yet. Remember, he's kind of been off in hiding as Horatio and Claudius received his letter. Okay. Eventually, Hamlet and the gravedigger have an interesting conversation about death. And the gravedigger has no idea that he's talking to Prince Hamlet because he says, oh, Prince Hamlet's in England. He's off to recover there. He's gone crazy. And so Hamlet kind of plays along with this man, not knowing who he is. Hamlet then, remember last act, Hamlet had this shift of his fascination with death. So we had his to be or not to be, where it's what happens to your soul. It's like dreaming, right? But that's the unknown. And then last scene, he talks about Polonius and the worm. So it's about what happens to your physical body. And this is extended in this scene. So Hamlet says, how long will a man lie in the earth ere he rot? So he's actually, sorry, that's not highlighting well. He's actually asking the gravedigger, how long does it take for a body to decompose? And the gravedigger is just nonchalantly talking about, 8 or 9 years, depends on your skin, your profession. And Hamlet is talking, and then they pull up this skull. And the gravedigger says, well, here's a skull that's been in the earth 3 and 20 years, so 23 years. Well, whose was it? Oh, it was the king's jester, so the court clown, and his name was Yorick. And Hamlet actually knows Yorick, so it's kind of odd to him that and this is that famous scene where he's holding the skull, but he's holding the skull of a person that he actually knew. And he talks about how, when he was a kid, he would ride around on Yorick's back and they'd laugh and he remembers his teeth. And so he again brings up this fascination. And Hamlet turns to Horatio and says, do you think Alexander looked like this? And he's talking about Alexander the Great. Did he look like this? Did he smell like this? And this is where Hamlet has this conversation and this idea that death is the thing in life that equalizes everyone. So basically what that means is it doesn't matter if you're Alexander the Great or a slave, when you die, you're bones. Okay, so he elaborates on that by saying, and this might be a significant quote for you to remember, is Alexander died, Alexander was buried, Alexander returneth to dust. The dust is earth, of earth we make loam, and why of that loam whereto he was converted might they not stop a beer barrel? Meaning, even Alexander the Great turned into dirt and dust, and his dirt and dust that his body decomposed to might be used as mud to stop a hole in a barrel. He talks about Caesar the same way, Julius Caesar. Caesar died and turned to clay, and he might also stop a hole to keep the wind away. And he's just, again, if you can just remember that idea that Hamlet believes that death is this thing that equalizes everyone. Very opposite of what we saw in Beowulf when they try to be the best that they can in life because that carries on after death. Hamlet's like, what's it matter if you're a king, a hero, wealthy, if in the end we just all end up as dust? So he thinks that death is the thing that levels everybody. But at that moment, the king and queen come in, Laertes, the body of Ophelia, and a priest. Again, this is a huge piece of dramatic irony because Hamlet has no idea that Ophelia has died. Also, concealment because they're off hiding, not necessarily hiding, but the king and queen haven't seen them yet. So we know that Hamlet's on stage, but they obviously don't. So, but Hamlet notices something specifically. First, he notices that the king and queen are there, right? So, what? Here comes the king and queen. Whose body are they following? But really, he says with such maimed rites. And if you use your side notes over here, maimed means incomplete, which means it doesn't look like a full Christian funeral. So automatically, even though he doesn't know who it is, he says, I think that whoever's corpse that is somebody who committed suicide because he's able just to tell because of what's happening with the funeral and what's lacking at a proper funeral. They step aside. Laertes is mad. When he says, what ceremony else? What ceremony else? He's saying, like, what else are you going to do for my sister? You have not given her a proper funeral. But the priest basically says, I'm going to just use the side notes here. The priest says he has performed her funeral rites to the extent allowed under church law. The manner of her death was suspicious, and if the king's orders hadn't overruled the procedures, she would have remained buried in unsanctified ground until Judgment Day. So basically, Claudius did Laertes a favor because of everything that happened with Polonius and still gave her a churchyard burial, even though she likely didn't deserve it because of the means of her death. Laertes is not happy. He keeps asking for more and more and more. And then finally he says, I tell thee, churlish priest, a ministering angel shall my sister be when thou liest howling. Basically, he's telling the priest, you're going to go to hell. My sister's going to be in heaven. And that word sister is obviously what clues in Hamlet that this is Ophelia that has died. So Hamlet now in this moment knows it's her. The queen, she steps forward and she says, I hoped thou shouldst have been my Hamlet's wife. I thought thy bride bed to have decked, sweet maid, and not have strewed thy grave. So this whole play, we weren't quite sure about Hamlet and Ophelia's relationship. And this moment's huge because the queen is openly saying that she wanted Ophelia to marry Hamlet and that she wanted to be decorating her bride bed, not her grave at her funeral. And that shows us a lot because poor Ophelia, part of her internal conflict, part of her confusion was that her own family was telling her that she wasn't good enough to be Hamlet's wife. But here the queen herself is saying that she was hoping that they would have made it. Eventually, Laertes is so overcome with grief that he jumps right into her grave. And he's sad and he's holding her. And then Hamlet comes forward and they basically fight. And they're fighting over who loved her more. And eventually they're able to break them apart. But Hamlet says, I loved Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not, with all their quality of love, make up my sum. Meaning, I love her more than 40,000 brothers put together, so I loved her more than you, Laertes. Hamlet is telling us that he truly did love Ophelia. So we finally have that answer. And then Hamlet says, what would you do for her? And they get over, like they start fighting over again who loves her more. Hamlet uses hyperbole by saying what he would do for her. He's saying, would you cry for her? Would you weep for her? Would you fight for her? Would you fast for her? Would you tear yourself for her? Would you drink up easel? Would you drink up vinegar? Would you eat a crocodile? I'd do all of those things. So you jumping in her grave is not showing that you love her more, because I love her way more than you. They're saying Hamlet's crazy, Hamlet's mad, let's keep them apart. This is not the time for the funeral. And Hamlet eventually leaves after he shows this like outburst of love for Ophelia over her grave. And the king is so focused on obviously his plan that this scene ends with him turning to Laertes saying, strengthen your patience in our last night's speech. So if you remember, they had made up that plan for how they're going to kill Hamlet. So the king says, be patient. Let's make sure that we're going to do this right as we planned. This grave shall be a living monument for your sister. Let's stay focused on what we need to do. Okay, and that ends the scene. Scene 2 is our final scene of the play. We're going to find out who lives and who dies. So one of your questions this week is to make that prediction. It is a tragedy. It's a Shakespearean tragedy. So you will probably have more deaths than living by the end of this if you remember the last few tragedies you've read. So please make sure you're finishing the Nearpod. Make sure that you've checked in with me this week